all these damn questions. All these damn questions. People always ask all these damn questions.
People always asking me all these damn questions, and they so confused. I don't know what to tell them. Why he do this? Why he do that? How you do this? How you do that? Hell yeah, I'm trying to do what I want, and I get good grades. That's why I wear these hats ways. These people recognize that's why they stay up in my face. Cause
people always ask me all these damn questions. People always ask all these damn questions.
Hey, okay. What's up? Welcome back.
Once again.
OA presents the Lighthouse series. All right, so today it's good to see you, man. You know, we're doing this like every 2 weeks now, you know.
Hey, we get it, bro.
I'm ready to get after it. We were talking recently, and we said we wanted to talk about this interesting thing, man. I can't remember what it was. What'd you say you want to talk about?
The law. LAW.
LAW. Loopholes always work. That's what I said. And so today, I guess the sweet serenade is to the law. Like the philosophy, the theory, why it exists. Like what does it mean? Does it really mean loopholes always work? Sure. I feel like it does, right? So why do you want to talk about the law?
No, man, because when we start to talk about the law, you know, sometimes when we don't understand how law works, it can cause a lot of confusion. Mm-hmm. And I think that the law is not written in a way so the average person understands it. It's written, it's layered, it's complex. But I think that the underlying thing behind the law is that it's not a new thing. You know, law isn't something we just invented in the last couple hundred years. Law has been around for millennia. So I think that the study of it definitely will be enlightening to see how, even though the law has changed over time, the reason for it has not.
Well, so when you think about the law, you want to think about what's right, what's wrong, what's good, for the bad. But at the end of the day, certain laws exist, and it's not necessarily for good or for bad. Maybe it's for safety purposes, but one could recognize that they could be used as a mechanism to collect probable cause to oppress or to harass.
Yes.
Because I mean, when you think about the law, I mean, let's think about the first drug law. Wasn't it for smoking opium?
Yeah.
And that was directed at whom?
My Chinese brethren.
Okay, and so we understand that the law is applicable to certain people, and certain people are above the law.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because you know what, call it what you want to call it, man. You know, law, command, statute. You know, we've created a lot of words, but I think the idea is that the rulers make the rules. You've probably heard the saying, the rulers make the rules. So the people who make your laws are the ones who are de facto ruling you. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that when you start to look at how laws come into creation, they usually come in because the idea of a law is to conserve something. You know, I want to keep these intact because I think if you go beyond this, there might be social disorder. So we need to keep order, which is why at the end of law, you have that order at the other side, which is usually, you know, go hand in hand.
Law and order.
Law and
what
order.
Isn't that like Chuck Norris's like feet's name? Like that his feet's name, like one his right foot and his left was law and order. That's like the joke, right?
Yeah.
But so when you think about, so this is an area for me because I taught it, but I don't, you know, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I don't have the credentials to say that I could litigate, but I know how the law works. And at one point in time, you know, I thought it was the end all be all for a split second until I didn't. And when you think about from a policy level, how law affects you know, just like I said, with that drug, with drug laws, how it affects certain people. And like how right now, if you were to talk about cannabis,
Yeah.
right? Like, why is it so slow? All right, so here's a question for you, Doc. Why is the marijuana legal laws or cannabis dragging ass so much?
Because it goes from a lens. You know, most people don't know that, you know, critical race theory started as critical legal studies first. It started off from a Marxist framework to understand how the laws in America were being used to our detriment. Because up until that time, we knew the laws were being used against us, but we didn't know the impact and how important and pervasive it was when I had the ability to criminalize you as an individual. Like, what does that do socially and psychologically to you? Now, we are just now beginning to unpack this idea that law now is how we see it from a frame of it's not been used in the way to produce justice, where law has been used to produce oppression. And that's when your law becomes unjust, or to use the word wrong, in its etymological sense, it's unjust to say that you have equality under the law when we know that our eyes don't lie to us.
Okay. I would agree again, but from the standpoint of when we think about injustice, we say, hey, the laws are made to keep people in line. So anytime that you step outside a line, there's going to be somebody to push you right back. But when we understand that there's multiple laws in that, so there's universal laws, right? There's Murphy's law. There's the law of gravity.
Yes.
Right. There are certain things that can be proven to say, hey, this is the this is the law. And there's certain laws that you can't see that exist in the universe, like the law of rhythm.
Yeah.
You know, and so when you think about the interpretation of law, like there are certain laws you have to follow, but there are certain laws that just need to be changed based on, we'll say, moral development.
Yeah.
You know, and so,
but think of it.
My confident opinion about people's understanding of the law is that it's safer to just follow the rules that are made for you, because the people before you were probably smarter and knew better. Who does that work for?
Yeah. We can speculate that the term grandfather in law didn't mean or pertain to certain people, because certain folks wasn't grandfathered in certain laws. And we understand that the idea that equality under the law was something that we didn't understand from the lynch mob perspective, because to me, the lynch mob says, I want law now. I want to be the I want to be the adjudicator, law enforcer. I want to be your due process of law, starter to finish. And so when you start to adjust for our system now, what I see is that there's a lot of people who don't understand that the law is malleable. Because who is more important, the lawmaker or the law enforcer?
The lawmaker.
Can the lawmaker put you in prison? Does the lawmaker come to your house, kick in your door, and take your guns from you? Does the lawmaker do that, or the law enforcer do it?
I would say the law enforcer does it. And I would say they when it comes to we'll say a punctuated event, I mean, for the emotional gripping answer, you're right. It's the law enforcement agency. But when you're talking about from the bigger scheme, from I might just have a lot of bias. I would say, right, the judicial branch is the most important, because you know these laws get made and laws can get changed, and we use case law. But you're right, the law enforcer, when the rubber meets the road, it's the law enforcement agent that is the most important.
Yeah. So if the law enforcer is the one that is going to put himself on the line, the more power you give the enforcer of the law, the more immunities or more privileges that you will have to give them in order to enforce it. Meaning you have to say, I'm not concerned what you do as long as you keep my ordinance first. You keep my stuff first, and then you protect mine, I protect you. So
as long as you're doing my work, I will protect you.
Yes, and protecting me to do my work, I will protect you. So I'll protect you, you protect me, and it becomes a cyclical relationship. What you see happen is when the lawmaker and the law enforcer have a disagreement. When there is an impasse, when the lawmaker says, I want this to happen, but the enforcer of the law says no. What do we do?
Who gets deference?
Well, that's the beauty of it. The beauty of it is that you can write what you want on paper all day, but if you ain't gonna willing to do what them words say, then you can just use that to, heat your living room up for you.
Well, and I would say, going back to what you said and moving on to the confident opinion portion, I would say, law enforcement agents, officers, put their body on the line. The lawmakers don't, right? And we saw what happened when lawmakers even got close to a threat, and that was, January 6th. But besides that, and I think that should have, I'll go back. I think I'm on tape saying that I agree with that being a thing. Like scaring the crap out of lawmakers to like get it together, get that shit together. Like I agree with that. But from the standpoint of having to go out there and enforce a law that one might not even know the origin of it. And so I think what's important right now is that we should always talk about the purpose of law, right? Like, what's the point of it? Because it's supposed to be from a standpoint of, safety, welfare. I mean, I would even say morale, right? But it can be used as a weapon.
When we go back into the oldest civilizations, when you go back to like the code of, Hammurabi, and you start to look at some of the ancient texts in Egypt, and you look at the codes and the laws, you'll see that there's a social order aspect to law, meaning that there is a societal standard that we want to impress upon people. And when they don't meet said standard, there must be penalty for breaking it. Because once again, the enforcer is important. But what ultimately makes the law to be followed is the penalty if breaking it. Because the penalty for breaking law determines what we need to do to sanction said action. You take life taken from you. So we understand quid pro quo. Probabilistically, we understand that is what we can get away with. We can get away with this idea that I'm okay with this punishment for this crime. But when society no longer agrees that we think this punishment is a problem for this crime, then all they would have to do is say, we will not obey your law. We will not obey. And when the citizenry does not obey, you don't have anarchy. The citizenry gets people in power who will do what they say, one way or another.
Okay. Well, so when I think about what law has done for me and what it does to people, I think about, well, where injustices come in. And so once you learn certain things about the law and you understand that there is sort of like a caste system,
yeah,
you either choose to play a part of it or you don't.
Yes.
I mean, you do what you have to do if you're working, but then at some point in time you have what.
But not like you're saying there. It's hard because sometimes but there's no, like, you go to a courtroom and there is no legal definition for the word justice because each case is unique and it has to be decided on its own merits. So what would be just in one situation may not be just in another. And so there's a judge according to law who has to arbitrate injustices. The judge is the one who sits above the process and says yay, nay. calling balls and strikes, so to speak. So when the judge agrees, or there's an issue of law, or there's an issue of interpretation of law, because once again, when we go back to the word power, it's the ability to define reality. And law is a tool for defining reality. Because
Right.
if you cannot understand controlling law, then you will not understand how to make something legal tender. You will accept this as money by law. You have to take this piece of paper. And if I control that paper, then I'm like, bruh, you got to take it. But what I start to see happening is that there's a situation where law has become a tool of negotiation with the people for anarchy, because ultimately the power rests in the people for law. When the people no longer want to obey it. So if you go back to the Magna Carta in England, King John, a bunch of his lords and dukes, and got up mad because he was taking too much taxes, and they came and they marched on them and say, look, bro, lower these taxes or we're going to take your head off. And
Well,
he said, all right, let's talk. Let's negotiate.
well, so at this particular point in time, it becomes a negotiation for life.
Yes.
Because we now have certain laws. We have laws, period, that block people off from finances, from healthcare, from a better life in certain point in time. The tax code, the legal codes that go along with that, we know that you have to be a specialist to understand that.
Yes.
And even the legal, so inside of the legal system, there's a camaraderie where you would think there's some adversarial things going on because of the position, because of the fiduciary position, but they are actually friends, right? So when you think about this caste system, and you think about, like, really, there's a generalization about how much lawyers get paid. Yeah. So you know that the field is put there to be able to translate a language that most people can't. Fair note that attorneys are, they always have clients, but they're always doing what somebody says unless they feel like they can't ethically, right? Yeah. So at the end of the day, they're listening to their client and what they need done, and they're just dancing in between this gray area. Yeah, that could be right or wrong depending on how you look at it.
Oh yeah, and most of the times, how you look at it is one thing, but when you can have multiple people see what you see, it adds validity. So
that's your jury. That's your jury, and so that's why when you're tried by your peers.
Yeah, and it's those amicus briefs. It's those people, the friends of the court, those who want to just, hey, write a little note. Hey, don't, put this, make sure he win this case. It got national security implications on it. You know what I'm saying? Oh,
exactly.
There's levels to it. But when it comes to law, I think that because of our system of federalism, we have different entities control different functions. Because law, I think, works the best when it's understood locally, or what are the impacts if I don't or do not follow or break said law? Because it becomes like a gambler. Like I'm risking that 6 to 8 months of my life ain't bad for hitting you in your face really hard as I can, because that's the most time under law I can get for assault, a simple assault. And so I'm thinking, like, is it worth it? But am I thinking about law in the sense of, is it prohibiting me from something? Because usually when you're into that part of the thinking, you're not using the logical part of your brain.
Logical part meaning if you're going to break said law?
Yeah, most people breaking the law who tend to do it on an emotional whim, meaning like I'm breaking the law because I have not used other resources, or I have determined that penalty for breaking said law. Let's say I'm a big bank and I launder $2 trillion in drug money, but then I get caught and I got to pay back a $5 million fine. Well, if my only penalty is a $5 million fine, but I've made trillions of dollars, here's $5 million. I'll pay the fine. I'll break your law.
Well, that's that's a good way to segue into what's the difference, right? Because to some people, a fine is nothing but a legal penalty to do what you want to do.
Yeah, exactly. And when you start to see like the laws that in your life, so when you want to understand a society in their laws, you have to understand what do they want you to die for. Like, what has the society determined that we no longer want you among us in a living form?
What
We
would
don't
that?
want, yes. So those
Give me an example.
Any capital offense that gets the death penalty.
Right. So you can die for rape and murder.
You can die for, I mean, theoretically, you could die for committing treason or aiding the enemies of America. You can die for that under the law. In the early laws, you could die for counterfeiting money. It was a death penalty offense. Counterfeiting money. Yeah. You could be killed. So one of the things that I've seen is that over time, we've used the law as a meter of morality, or a meter of our justice of our society. And I think that has been unfortunate, because we see many things in history that have been lawful, but that were not just. Slavery is a good example. It was lawful, but we can make an argument that it is not just. And it was not just. And so because it was not just, we had to develop in our system a way to psychologically decouple our emotional connection to your plight by our system of justice, to make people think that our system is colorblind and it is equal, but it is not. And that magic trick that we've been trying to put on is is no longer working anymore, because we can now look at the data ourselves and we say, listen, I say, man, listen, what's the biggest thing? What's the biggest indicator that you're going to be a criminal in life? The biggest indicator?
Skin color.
No.
Oh, education level.
No.
Geographic.
No.
Okay. I did my 3. Should I phone a friend?
You can tell me, man, listen, the number one indicator if you're going to be a criminal or not is the person making the laws. Not what you do or do not do.
Yeah.
Not what you do or do not do. The person making
defer.
the law can determine if you're going to be criminal or not.
So that gets back into the conversation that we were having about probability.
Yes.
Like the probability of something happening to you.
Yes.
And so when you think about from a law standpoint, there's certain ways that I move that I know legally I have to move so I can stay out of some like everything you do is to stay out of some sort of legal trouble, pretty much, right?
Yes. And when you start to look at the law in America, specifically in the southern colonies in America, there were laws that only applied to certain citizens. For example, if you were Black, you cannot congregate with 3 or more people after the hours of 8 o'clock in certain cities. You can, if you were Black, you couldn't do this. You couldn't travel. You couldn't go here. You had to have a white person with you. If you were Black, you couldn't testify against a white person in the courtroom. So legally, that just told a white person, anything I do to this Black person, they can't sue me because they're not a person. But so when you start to look at how the law has been used to dehumanize people and to socially segregate, but ultimately emotionally segregate people, because I believe that the law, because there were people who were doing things that were evil, but they thought it was important to uphold the law. You see that in America a lot, people wanting to take the law into their own hands.
Vigilante. What's the
Because if you start to study the history of our country, we were a country that was made by vigilantes who making laws. These were people who said, hey, look, Great Britain, hey, sorry about that. We ain't trying to pay all that tax money no more. We got to figure this out another way. And they was like, well, look, you are property, you belong to us. And we like, hey, we want to negotiate that contract. And so in order to create a new law, because one form of law that's not mentioned is international law too often, But when it comes to international law, it's who has the biggest force to enforce their said will. Because whoever has the biggest force, that's why Rothschild, man, I think Mayor Rothschild said, listen, I don't care who makes the country's laws. Just let me print the money. He said, I don't care who make the laws. If I can print the money, I'm good. And so when you start to understand that the relationship between influence, power, and money, then you'll see why a Supreme Court justice can get bribed.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of power in being able to manipulate. There's a lot of power in being able to manipulate the law.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And so understanding that once you manipulate, I find that if you could manipulate information and the law, I mean, you control morality.
Well, you have to manipulate a law before its creation. That's what special interests are. They are the ones who, when the law is written, it has to be written with your interest in mind. If not, then you won't find a way to loop a hole around it. So you have to be involved in the process of making law. But in order to do that, you must first understand what is public perception and their opinion, and you must ultimately understand how do I keep the agenda that are anti my agenda away from people. Therefore, law comes in. So law says if a third party candidate needs 5% of the popular vote to get federally matching funds. So that means I have to keep any third party person under 5% because they can't get matching money for a national platform. So now I can say I have a duopoly because the lawmaker and the law benefactor sometimes know each other very well. And there's a relationship there where it's like, hey, there's these cities that are creating these industries where they are having privately owned prisons come into their cities to incarcerate people. But by bringing a privately owned prison in there, what you're telling them is that I have a quota that so many percent of these beds have to be filled. Now I need a law enforcer to go in and to put people in these beds. So what do I do? How do I create an environment where I always have people to put in these beds? Now I got to get into your society. Now I got to get into how you raising your kids. Now I got to get into the music you listening to.
That clone, a clone named Tyrone,
yes,
was a big deal to me. That movie. I don't know if you saw it on Netflix with Jamie Foxx.
I saw it.
The way that they portrayed that movie, that it's like, no. See, no, we need you down here doing all this tomfoolery because, and that it really does feel like sometimes I am walking around a bunch of plants. Like people are planted just to be, or I see certain things like, how is there not evolution there yet? You know what I mean?
You know, and so you'll notice I don't really talk about people too much. And the reason that I don't is because I'm not interested necessarily in tokenism, or I'm not interested in idea fairies, because you know we have, for lack of a better word, you know, I think when we look at what the law allows and or permits, when the law no longer meets the needs of the people, they will change said law to meet what their needs are. It's just so happened in this country, our needs don't seem to align because of polarization makes law harder to change. And I think that when you start to look at how polarized we're becoming, we're starting to see this idea that I don't have the ability to study the merits of your argument because I'm just going to dismiss you as an individual. So if I dismiss you as an individual, then your arguments are along the way dismissed. And I think that's the error we're getting into when we start talking about policy and law, because we're seeing freedom of speech is under attack, man. I swear, bro, if you say something that people even think is anti-Semitic, bro, you're going to have a congresswoman at your house. You're going to have somebody, you know, and I'm not saying, All I'm saying is that we're getting a lesson on how law and power work together, because when they come together, and James Baldwin said it best, man. He said, ignorance allied with power is the greatest threat to, the most ferocious threat to that justice can have. And you see this happening so often, where the people who are making or keeping these policies are, it's like you're playing with things you don't know you're playing with.
Well, the benefit of the policymakers is they really don't care about the people it affects as much as they care about being in power enough to make the laws and continue to live the way that they live and pass that down to make sure privilege stays where it stays, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
I would, and so from the strategic all the way down to the tactical, I mean, law is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
Yes. Yes, it's holding the equilibrium together. It is what we are discovering is that there are there are universal laws that we sometimes don't want to acknowledge. Like James Baldwin said this, man. You know, I like James. He said, "Look, man, when you realize that my hunger is your problem, you're gonna be concerned about it." He said, if I'm hungry, it's a problem for you. And I think that when you, as a society, don't see it that way, when you don't see my hunger as a problem for you, then what you're going to end up doing is you're going to emotionally distance yourself from people who don't have as much. And I think that goes into your argument about classism and about, social systems where we're measuring our value by what we possess, whether it be intellectual, whether it be financial, whether it be academic titles before our name, whatever it is. When you're measuring yourself by these things, you're going to only be as small as those things are. And I think that that's where most of the time we see law comes into conflict, is when the people who are telling you, like that, giving you a warning, telling from the Lighthouse, hey, your laws ain't just. That we're giving you a warning.
Right.
The laws ain't right, because they are creating an effect that I will not go into the mind of anybody and say I know what their intent is for anything they want to do. I may not know your intent, but I do know your outcome. Because I can see your outcome and say, if your intent was to make us a safer society, then your outcome ain't producing that.
Well, this is where I think now we get back into understanding, the goal based on society and the moral development that the groupthink goes through. So groupthink, being us as a society, we understand, I would say, hey, there's certain laws in place to make sure, we uphold safety. And people break those laws based on some sort of benefit. But as we get through and we start thinking about maybe like utilitarianism at its, at its general thought, right? It's say, hey, we do the best, we do the greatest for the most amount of people.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, from my standpoint, that moral development is important, and it's based on again, those moral foundations that I can always grab onto, right? But go ahead, you.
So to your point, man, I just so you know, man, I reject most European philosophy about morality, whether it be Stuart Mill, Hegel, because they haven't figured out how to not fight each other to death. Hegel, the ends justify the means. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? It means that whatever I determine is my ends. What? I mean, like there's so much moral flexibility in Eurocentric philosophy, you could justify anything for any reason. And so my question that I first have when I come across any law is I ask, who is the lawgiver? Who is the giver of the law? What authority does this lawman have? Now, historically, we've made the argument that God is the ultimate lawgiver. God is the lawmaker. And so since God is the lawmaker, i.e. 10 commandments, whatever, since God is the lawmaker, to challenge said law is to challenge God.
Yeah.
So don't do that. Because if you challenge God, then the people who follow him will be the enforcers of his challenge. So,
right.
Historically, in England, and some would say earlier in Africa, now you have to, when I say this, I say this in the time framework that African-centric people had already developed this, but Eurocentric people had not. So socially, culturally, the Eurocentric culture was more homogenous than Eurocentric cultures from necessity, because we didn't have to fight for resources.
There was a lot of resources.
Whereas in Europe, there ain't that many resources. So me and my clan got to fight you in your clan to see who can be the man.
Right.
So anyway, so when you start to look at those two separate frameworks, what I see is that the law is the intersectionality of how do I merge culture. But I can't merge culture unless we have the same lawgiver. Because if my lawgiver is different than your lawgiver, and neither of them can have a debate without me and you present, we're going to have a problem. Because when you lose your argument, your moral person says you can murder me. So if you murder me because your lawgiver says you can murder me because you lost the argument, then you still cognitively right. I was an infidel. I was a heretic. I was a whatever, burnt at the stake. But you are now justified. And not only are you justified, you're morally cleansed because the person who you killed for said all you have to do is ask for my forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you can ask for your own forgiveness from a morality perspective, you're going to be less moral by default. You're going to be less moral because you can justify any action because you and the lawgiver have a personal relationship. Like me and the lawgiver, we cool. That's my boy. We roll out. He said I could do my thing and I'm good. On Monday, I'm gonna do a couple of them. I'm gonna do some Our Fathers and some, Hail Marys, and we'll keep it moving. But that's what I'm saying. So who is the lawgiver? Is my first question about law, because I need to know who the lawgiver is before I can challenge his law.
That's a very interesting. You just brought up something interesting that I'm sure we talked about before, but the Catholic Church, right? You did your Hail Marys. Like what that we have enough information to know that there has been appropriation. Okay.
Yeah, but once again, the issue has never been information. The issue is revelation. Revelation is what is revealed to you. See, I don't try to explain something. I don't try to have a conversation with someone at the same time. If they're sitting on a chair, remove their chair from them at the same time of the conversation. That's not fair because they won't be able to focus on their thought. And so when you're talking to someone, they have mental law, they have mental frameworks, they have mental things that they sit upon. And if you remove what they're sitting upon, it will cause them to fall in the conversation. And in order for them not to fall, they need revelation, not information. And revelation is when they have their own eureka moment, like the light just came on in their head.
That's your thing. And I get that, right? So it's the difference between logic and knowledge.
Well, no, but it's the manner of impartation. It is the source, not the data. And see, when I think that I am acting on the behalf of a deity, a God who left the book of instructions, and if I follow said instructions from said book, then it will produce for me what it will need to produce in me. So when I read that book and it says that, oh, I'm going to be enslaved for 400 years, but then after that period of time, you're going to come out with great success and wealth and stuff, I can just apply it to my life and say, you know, my people been in 400 years of slavery. Why don't I just incorporate that story for me? But on the flip side, the people who use it for their own purposes can say, listen, slave, obey your master. Well, guess what? God made me your master. And he told me to tell you what this book say. And I'm going to leave out those parts about you being, free and that slavery. I'm going to leave out all that because that's inconvenient for me. But so when I say that to the question of who is your lawgiver, because see, no one's lawgiver is more powerful than my lawgiver. I concede this because however powerful you think yours is, mine is one more powerful. so that's hey. Hey.
I hear, yeah.
So however far you want to go, I'm willing to go further.
Right. I'm
going to go. However deep you want to go, I'm willing to go deeper. But
that sounds very familiar.
But when I talk to people, I make sure that I understand that some people, okay, here's a test for people. I tell them, I said, think of something that's impossible. Okay, and now as you think about something that's impossible, think about what would happen if you saw it or you witnessed it or it came true. To you, it would be a miracle. It would be miraculous to you. Mm-hmm. But because I don't think it's impossible, because I've seen it already, it's Tuesday for me.
Tuesday, going up.
But for you, it's a miracle because something that you didn't think could happen did happen. Boom. That's called revelation. Meaning, right. And sometimes it could be like 100 people have talked to this one person about one subject, and every 100 of them, he was just like, "Nah, I'm good. Nah." But that 101 dude,
got him.
This day, he had a different attitude. He was like, man, I've been saying no so long, man. Let me just say yes so he can stop asking me questions. I'm gonna pester you into your greatness. But no, what he told him is this, man, is that when you start to see how it operates in people, when information is revealed to them, there is a tendency to want to go run and tell and share it to others. Some would call it evangelizing. Some would call it standing on your truth. Some would call it standing on your square, whatever you want to call it. It's got many names. But when you start to do that, you acknowledge that I am going to be limited in my power unless my lawgiver is very powerful. Because the power of my lawgiver will determine what laws I can or cannot break successfully and preserve my life. Need to know that.
So and now we've gone full circle, right? And so we come back to life.
Yeah.
And how the legal world affects people's lives.
Yeah.
And so, that understanding law. So I like to share screen, but we're at 43. Wanted to do 45 minutes today. But like from a legal perspective, from a law perspective, it affects the mental health of people.
Yeah.
And it acts like it's coming from a deity. However, it's not deity-like.
Yes.
And that's because it's not from a deity, right? Like none of the stuff you see, God gives us the ability for free will. And I'm saying free will is what we have, what else do you have but free will?
But you said something, man. He said injustice breeds insanity. Injustice breeds insanity because you have to reconcile what you're telling me from what I am seeing. You are telling me something and I'm seeing something different. And you are not telling me why I see something different than you.
Well, that's why it's important to learn. Because once you learn that all this stuff is a game and you see exactly where the game is being played, you can at least jump out of that. Okay, I'm not crazy. It's just, this is just not fair.
No. Like, do you know how many people are willing? They've done experiments and research on this. They will change their answer to a false answer if it will get them social esteem with the crowd they're in to not be divergent from the group. And so people will do this. They will conform and morph to what is or is not acceptable opinion, word, thought, and deed. So, for example, if we're talking about some law that we want to challenge or change, then we have to understand, why is this law in place? Who we have to go to the history of the law. We have to say, why was it enacted? What were the circumstances? Well, the Mann Act was passed in 1910, and that was only passed to get Jack Johnson from going across interstate with white women. And the Congress was so mad, the federal government got involved. It's like, we can't have this black dude taking these white women across state lines. Oh no. You want to talk about cocky explanation? This dude was like, look, I got the money. You told me America is about the money. I got more than most of y'all. So now I want to do what I want to do with my money, and now make up a new argument.
Right.
Make up a new argument.
And that's all. It's all it's all a find another way.
Find another way. And when law fails, violence ensues. Because violence, what makes people become lawless is the same reason that laws don't change. But see, and people don't understand that. When King said the riot is the language of the unheard, what he's saying is that those who you do not let in the legislative room to decide legislation will vote a different way. They'll vote with torches. They'll vote with bricks through windows. They'll vote, through property destruction and damage, and to include themselves. Which is
terroristic. But yes. It's a civil terroristic, because it's like a terror. The terror is from inside of your home, right?
Yeah, but see, when we label terrorism in a way, we start off with a premise that terror is not a political tactic and or strategy that has been the most advantageous tool of those who are fighting a larger force that they cannot fight symmetrically. So
if we use it objectively, right, we would say the terror is being used to affect some sort of political agenda, and the terror could be, politicized or propaganda as whatever is needed. Like, that's why the local news.
Yeah, but when the terror becomes people who hold different ideas than you, when the terror becomes people who you don't support from a political perspective, when they become the terror, when they become the incompetent in the name and insert adjective for them because we don't say their names anymore, when they become the terror, what you're finding is that you're on a very short timeline when people who have power, who control law, are in the waning hours of their power. They're the most dangerous, because what they will do is they will try to inculcate or insulate their laws for their future children and their generations. They will try to do that while they're alive. And while they're alive, they know that they will give tools to their lineage to fight the system of oppression. For example, and I'll give you just a quick example. We know that right now, Black people are the most in prison in America per capita than any other people. Mm-hmm. But I'd submit to you that if it ever became that number was switched in this country, where the predominant number of people in prison, let's say, were white in America, I think our prison system would improve.
It would.
I think our prison system would look like European Norway, where they have little camps and they can just come back in and check in. I think our prison system is so harsh because we have created a system where those who it was never intended to impact affects them now. And it is affecting them into a point where they're like, hey, we're calling for changes, and we've seen more changes because more of you have been getting incarcerated in the last 15 years than we've seen in generations. But
Well,
that's wrong.
That seems like a very good game theory type move, right? Because there are situations now that a lot of the people that are, incarcerated, that are, Black, African American, people of color, whatever we're calling them today, right? When I say calling them, I mean the names, because that's us. I mean,
he said pick one.
Yeah, I'm saying when you think about that incarceration, I miss my thought, but thinking about the people who get incarcerated, who live a certain type of way, once they go into prison, I'm hearing stories of people saying that they live better in prison than they did on the outside.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
But hold on. Let's not. I would be remiss if I ran away from this, because that now creates a situation that people don't mind getting locked up and being in prison and doing whatever. So that now becomes the badge of honor. You're getting more badges. You remember what I was talking about? The social laws, are dangerous. Our cultural laws that we have that are dangerous.
Yeah, but I think that when you start to talk about this, I think that we're not reaching a level of publicity or press to make, I think, the issue impact those it doesn't impact. Because I don't think that you're seeing laws changed because society became more just. I think laws change because a demand is created on those with it, as in, like, it's almost like ultimatum-ish. It's like this or this. You can have what they call it, man. It said you can have freedom and you can have justice, but you said pick which one you want. Pick which one. I either want freedom or I want justice. Now, you can't have both, but you can have one.
It's like that old saying: you can get it fast, cheap, or good, right?
Yeah, but you can't. And so we've needed ways psychologically, which is I don't think we study enough. We need psychological understanding of why we reject slave owners today, why we reject the institution today of slavery. We don't reject what it built. We don't reject their ideas. And I think that is so interesting, because for some reason, some of the most immoral people we could ever say walk the planet created our system. But it was genius. Like, if you think about it, it was genius, because it's the oldest constitution, it's the oldest legal document in the world today. These dudes were the enlightened of their day. I mean, they studied under Hobbes and Rousseau, and they could read Machiavelli, and they were the most read people of their day, and they understood the history of governments. They understood what happened to Rome. It was very common knowledge at the time, right. And so they said, listen, let's do this. And they only had one flaw. It was only one fundamental flaw. And the house is only as strong as its foundation. And until you fix the foundation of the house fundamentally, and James Baldwin has the question. He said, why did you need a nigga? He said, you got to ask yourself that question. Don't ask me. Ask yourself that. Why did you need one? Because if you look at history, most societies have always had a class of people who were at the bottom of the cast.
Right.
It's not a new phenomenon. It was the gypsies in Europe. It was the Jews at one time in Europe. It was so over history, we've just redesignated the out group of people. Right now, it's the Palestinians. You know what I'm saying? So we all Once you otherize somebody, all you do now is say you are no longer protected under my law. Because when you start to say it at a personal pronoun level, it becomes my law. It's my law because I live under it. Because you got a lot of folks nowadays, man, I tell you, they be like, I'm a sovereign citizen. I say, okay, but go drive on these public roads and tell them that with some melanin in your system. And you just tell them.
Yeah.
On the public road, just tell them. And then it's like, bro.
Yeah, not the same results. Not the same results.
Because
hey, man, anybody ever say you look like Timberland?
I don't know.
For 1 second, man, you just gave me a Timberland moment.
Baby.
You know what I mean?
But that's what I see when I study, because I say that when we find out who your lawgiver is, then maybe I won't talk to you. I'll go negotiate with your lawgiver.
Well, we're at a point in time now where we say your jurisdiction reigns supreme, right? And so under jurisdiction, if you make the law, the rule makers make the rules.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to pretty much believe in what they believe in, because their laws are going to consciously or unconsciously affect your morality. And
they'll tell you, you might be in their jurisdiction, but you might not have standing to bring a case before them, because you may not can prove a harmful effect of the law, because the law writer wrote a 6 months window clause before enforcement, so you couldn't get injured, and he knew that you would not be able to appeal your court in time, so he could rescind the policy to already do its effect. Game the system. Game the system. Because I understand that I have to give the people the semblance of law, but I have to give them process, not progress.
Right. It has to go through the process. It doesn't necessarily.
But the process, when they don't want it to make progress, has already started from day one. Like when they tried to pass the George Floyd policing bill, I said, listen, bro, if y'all can't do this right now, it ain't gonna never happen.
Right.
This is the window.
Right.
This is the event. This is it.
PET.
This is it. This is the event. So when you say down, now, so did the city of Milwaukee have to burn down if they would have took those officers to jail immediately? I'd say no. They burnt the city down because there was no justice there. Like, why you got a courthouse? If ain't no justice happening at the courthouse, then you don't need the building.
Right, burn it down.
So psychologically, if ain't no justice here, the building can go.
Right.
And it's just another eyesore in our other eyesore community. But at least now you don't have to put up there the semblance of justice out here, because people don't need to be told when something is not just. You can look at something and be like, you know what? He had to kick that dude in the head on the ground like that. He ain't had to do that. He was handcuffed, not fighting nobody. He ran up there and treated his head like a soccer ball. What law you got? What law you got? Because there's always this challenge that people say. They say, you know what? What law would you have put in place to stop this shooting? Or what would you have done? And I always think people who ask this question, I don't think about answering that question, because they've already accepted the idea before they heard. Like, people who ask you these type of questions aren't thinking critically.
Oh, right. Okay.
They want you to do the work. They want you to do the work for them. And so I'll do the work for you because it's easy work. Because I can tell you exactly why. But what I find is that if I talk to somebody about policy in real time, it's going to turn into a psychological conversation. It will turn into a psychological conversation, because I have to understand the reason that you underpin these ideas is because there's a psychological conditioning that you are still under. And that's fine. It's not a problem, because the law and religion mean the same thing. It means to bind. It means to hold it together. And
well, so for the final thought, then, I mean, law is policy. You would agree with that?
Yeah.
And so with law being policy, policy is going to dictate a lot of things that affects the psychological welfare of everybody that is under that jurisdiction. And so I would say it's important to understand the law and how it affects the psycho environment.
Yes.
And how now we're able to use these events with the law as qualitative like experience to help change policy.
Yeah. And one of the things that my concern has never really been about necessarily changing a policy. I think that there's a lot of unintended consequences that come with policy. I think what it comes to is understanding why are we getting the result? Like, why does it produce this? Like, why is it producing this? Because I think that we're grading law by its intent and not its outcome. And it's like, we need to relook at this authority because, okay, marijuana is legal in my state. But why is it that when the police are stopping people for marijuana, they're black?
And again,
why?
Because the law is used to be able. Well, I mean, it's just,
I'm saying that, but what I was saying is that when you're talking about how the law is used, but the law does not tell the law enforcer how to and when to enforce it.
But that's on purpose.
No, I mean that discretion. The discretion of the law enforcer has always been the area, because when we were lynched in America, most of the time they went and got us out of the courthouse. They got us out of the prison. Most of the time it was the police officer who opened the cell up. You know what I mean? So we understand that the history is that law enforcers know that when the mob wants violence, the enforcer can become in danger. So the enforcer either joins the mob, let me help these insurrectionists down the steps, let me move this barricade for these insurrectionists, because if I help the mob will protect me. And I might agree with the mob. So hell yeah. And
enter the sheriff that's the Ku Klux Klan member.
So when we saw that the FBI put out reports that white supremacists want to infiltrate law enforcement organizations, then we know what's going on. We know that there is an accelerationist agenda that is designed to perpetuate an organization that when the chaos happens, you lean to the side of the people who you agree with that are causing the chaos. And that is what I don't think people are ready to see. And that's my final thought.
Oh, well, that's a good final thought. I would say my final thought in totality is understanding how laws work. And I mean, I think most laws should be testable.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a reason behind it, but also understanding that this is a framework. Like CRT, critical race theory, falls in the legal framework.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why it was such a touchy subject that nobody knows how to talk about unless you're a legal expert.
Yeah. And to be fair, people in other fields have taken it to apply it in areas that it was not originally designed for. So right now it's being used in education. It's been used in medicine right now.
The pillars.
Yes, it's been used in medicine. And I think that when you start to see that, although it started in one way, it's the best theories form tentacles.
Yeah, branch off.
They branch off. And
right. The analogy of a tree.
Yes. And that's the best theories, because when you branch off your theory, what you're getting is more validity, because your branches are how we are measuring you, not how high you want to be.
Right.
How many branches coming?
Yeah, that's a good one. How many branches? That's for everybody. It's like, it's not how high you go. It's how long are your branches?
How long are your
branches? How many do you have?
How long are your branches? Because I will tell you, man, your branches is so that other people can sit and relax.
That is the final thought. What do your branches look like?
What's your branch?
And hey, listen, because there's at least 3 types of people. You got people who are like leaves, and they leave after the season.
Yep.
You got people who are like branches, and those are the people you generally deal with. And then you have people who are the roots. And even though you don't deal with those people all the time, you know what you know what it is, right?
The day ones.
Exactly, right? So what your roots look like, what your branches look like, what your leaves look like this season. They looking good, they looking bad. Mine just got raked up. Shit. But listen, man. Listen, I'm still showing my reverence with OA by KJ. Go take a look, get you a hoodie, get you a mug, get you something. I mean, come on, people. I'm trying to get money here because I'm retired. I gotta do something. Buy a hoodie. Jesus. Anyway, hey man, it was good talking to you. As always, being a guide in the morning with the Lighthouse series. We out here.
All day. I know.